All right, if I've not met you, my name is Charisse Torres. I am Chief Marketing Officer here at Circle, and we have an extraordinary panel for you today. We are going to talk about scaling for 1 billion users and solving the blockchain trilemma. You don't want to hear about that from me, although I'm sure I could vamp about it, so I'm going to hand it over to some folks who are actually building these solutions today. Please welcome to the stage our moderator. Oh my goodness, Avichal Garg, co-founder and partner at Electric Capital.
You guys didn't want to walk out with me? Am I at the end? Okay. Hey, everybody. All right, people still trickling in from lunch. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's nice to see everybody. Nice to be back in person.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about scaling, which the panel here knows a lot about. Why don't we kick it off with intros, and then we'll jump into some questions. So maybe we just work. Actually, we want to start on that side, and we'll work.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Paul Riegle. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Algorand. I've been with the project for maybe a little over 4 years now, just prior to launch. And I came from a company called Carbon Black, cybersecurity space, if you're familiar with it. Was there for about 7 years, did a number of things before that, big companies, small companies, hyperscale startups, stagnant startups. But nothing matches the fun of this space. That's the pace of innovation, the interesting challenges, interesting people, great panels like this.
Hey folks, I'm Anatoly, co-founder of Solana, CEO of Solana Labs. We launched about 2 years ago and kind of had, I think, the first parallelizable virtual machine on a public permissionless blockchain. And at this point, I think we're handling more transactions per second than all the other top blockchains combined. And I see about like 1 million NFTs minted a week. So it's a bear market for some, but I guess not for everyone.
Boom, bringing the heat already. I love it.
I'm Patrick O'Grady. Nice to meet you guys. I'm the head of engineering at Ava Labs, the team working on Avalanche. I've been here for about 2 years. I joined just after mainnet launch, actually, and prior to that, I spent about 2 years at Coinbase and the crypto engineering team working on the Rosetta project, which Coinbase uses to add different chains to the exchange. So excited to be here.
Hey everyone, I'm Illia, co-founder of Near. Near is really focused on how do we actually get to 1 billion users, not just by scaling, but also making it really easy to build and to use. And so kind of underlying technology is sharding, but at the same time is developer tooling, enable you program any language you want, and kind of onboard with any experience like your users want, kind of hiding blockchain if needed.
Great. All right, guys, thank you for being here. So maybe to kick it off, Ethereum's launched proof of stake. We have L2s that work. Sharding's going to happen imminently, so we don't need other L1s anymore, right? Like we solved the scalability problem, right? So you guys you're shutting down? No?
You hiring?
No, it's seriousness. What do you guys think? Like, is this why have all these other L1s?
Near.
Yeah, I mean, what is the reason to have all these other alternative L1s if Ethereum is already starting to scale?
I mean, I think, so first of all, Ethereum, the proof of stake Ethereum still doesn't scale beyond what it was before, right? And so they can probably increase gas limit actually a bit more now.
But L2s are here now, so.
Have you tried using them?
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Say more.
So kind of in general, right, like if we're talking about users, not about developers, not about crypto enthusiasts, users don't really care about blockchains as much. They don't really care about which layer 2, layer 3, layer 5 they use. The reality is they just want to use apps and have a good experience. And so layer 2 by nature are fractioning that experience. Now they push on the user to understand, do I have gas on that layer 2? Is the app on the layer 2 that I have kind of my other assets on? Is the kind of finality of this thing will happen anytime soon? Like imagine actually something does happen and like you wait for 6 days and then it rolls back. Like all kinds of things like that is now pushed on the user scope, right? And if we're talking about developers who are actually focused on the user onboarding, right, bringing millions of users, they're just not going to use this kind of technology until it's aligned with that. And so I think generally solving for that problem, solving for the problem of like, as a user, I don't really care. I just want it to work really fast, really cheap, consistent, secure, and not thinking about like the details of the implementation is what the space is striving for. And right now, layer 2s are not delivering that at all.
Anybody think layer 2s are doing a great job right now? Any of you guys think layer 2s are doing a great job?
It's hard to hear.
I think they're. I think I would rephrase the question. In a world where a single chain without any sharding or layer 2s can handle all of the world's capacity, what's the point of all these other things? And is the friction going to be like overcome? Like, how can you overcome the friction of using these like technologies that I think have a lot of trade-offs for usability and composability if a single thing can do it? And folks often try to say, well, we need infinite block space, but that's actually overestimating the problem is just as bad as underestimating it. Google does about like 80,000, 100,000 searches per second. That's probably all we need for a blockchain right now today to handle one Google size worth of blockchain, right? Like everyone in the world using it day to day for some purpose. That would probably fit within 100,000 TPS. And that's achievable with today's technology, today's hardware. Basically just add cores until it works. So if there's enough demand for that, like we actually have products that need it, then it'll happen. And you don't need L2s, you don't need all these other things. So then like the question is, where is the demand likely to come from? And like, is it going to scale in a way that is going to even, like, if you have the use case that's like gaining 10 million users a year or like 1 million users a month, are you going to care about L2s or L1s, or are you really focused on growth, and then everything else becomes kind of a very small decision?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Ethereum has done a lot to push the space where it is. I think with ETH2, they're pursuing a particular set of trade-offs that are aligned with what their community is looking for. It's very roll-up centric, as everyone knows. Like it's all the talk now outside of enabling withdrawals from staking deposits is expanding the space for roll-ups to actually put data into the ETH chain. Sharding and everything that they're looking for there is just expanding the amount of space to do that. Believe it or not, there's other ways to try and scale blockchains, as everyone up here will tell you. The reason for why we're still here and why people are still working on this is we're still so new and so early in the space. It seems foolish to give up and stop searching for alternative methods and ways to grow. Examples would be finality. Like ETH2 is not particularly optimized for like sub-second finality, like many of the other people on the stage are trying to achieve. L2s only multiply that because you're relying on the security of that L1. And so, okay, do we just accept that finality has to be measured in minutes and then give up there? I think that there are other areas and other approaches and trade-offs to consider.
Can you talk a little bit more about the trade-offs that you all have decided to make at Ava, and like why you think of those as the right sets of trade-offs? Because you're also not taking the beefy L1 approach that Solana is taking. So why are you taking the approach that you're taking?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a few questions there. One, I think, importantly, I think we lead with two things. One is the decentralization of the validator set, and then the finality at which transactions occur. Why that? Well, first of all, I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, maybe around decentralization, but at some point, it's a matter of how resilient is your chain when it matters. And right now, it hasn't really mattered as much. And so I think that we've taken that as a principle that we designed for. Secondly, finality, right? If you want to actually compete with traditional web systems that give you an impression of instant finality, I hope your system is trying to be just as fast. So at least our two principled approaches start there. But then from the actual scaling approach, instead of going with the model like the large L1 or I think you referred to as the beefy L1 approach, I think we have different goals in mind for how people will actually scale throughput on different decentralized systems. And if you know Avalanche, you've heard of subnets, I'm sure. But the idea that is shared by Cosmos, is shared by Polkadot, is the idea is that you have a number of heterogeneous chains that are somehow connected by an overarching ecosystem. And so we just believe that that's the right approach. And I think we could spend hours talking about exactly why that is. But generally, we think that the flexibility of different virtual machines, as well as giving the people, developers, the ability to create chains where people can pay in their own tokens and define their own validator sets, is very interesting outside of just sheer throughput with a single virtual machine framework.
Illia, what do you think of the BFL1 approach and sort of the, just because you guys have taken a different approach?
Yeah, I mean, we're coming kind of from Google, and my co-founder was at a company that powers a lot of, the database that powers a lot of Fortune 500 companies, and there's no single machine that can process kind of all of the Google's requests or all of the, like Uber or name a mass adoption company. And so for us, it's always been like, how do we make the most efficient and most usable platform that needs to scale and run on many machines in parallel, right? Kind of the parallelization is imminent, and this is actually, from my perspective, the subnets, the parachains, the rollups, the zones, it's all sharding. It's all how do we parallelize execution? And then the trade-offs start to come in, which is like how fast is communication and how easy it is communication between the shards. Like how much of the developer and user need to know about this. And from my perspective, rollups, subnets, parachains, and zones are all actually in one world where you kind of need to understand as a user what the hell is going on. And like for me, as a developer, I don't. I just want to launch my app, right, and get it to be used. And it should be able to scale up to a whole capacity of, if one computer pretty much, may be beefy or not, but and then even beyond that, I should be able to shard that as well and actually go beyond that, right? And so from my perspective, that is the design goal. And so because of this, we actually, on near each contract account, even your individual account is a full chain. It's just they're packaged together for up to kind of in batches and actually run in these batches in on physical shards. And so through that, we can actually easily rebatch them for the kind of based on needs, right? So for example, one of the apps like Aurora can have its own full shard of capacity as if it ran a subnet, parachain, rollup, name a thing, but it still has exactly the same API, same exact interaction with all the apps, and users have no change or no notice what happens underneath, right? Again, similar, you go to Netflix, you don't actually understand that they spun out more machines because there's people using Netflix, and they need more capacity.
How do you think about, for the folks that are pro sharding in some form, how do you think about breaking composability or sort of the communication overhead or some of these other trade-offs? Why is that the right trade-off? Or do you think composability doesn't matter? How do you think about that?
So I think composability matters. I think the reality is it will be asynchronous composability, and this is where I think with Anatoly you probably can argue about this, but the reality is, again, rollups, parachains, we're living in the world where you need more than one computer to do stuff, and it will be asynchronous. And so if we do that asynchronously, then let's do it the best asynchronous way possible. Let's have communication as fast as possible and have exactly the same security model, so again, you don't need to think about it.
You guys have thoughts? You want to jump in, either of you?
I can't hear the question, but I'm sure I have some thoughts. What was the question?
The question was, how do you think about composability in this sharded world, right? If you have shards, you sort of have to make certain assumptions about synchronous composability, and so how do you think about that? And I'm sure, Anatoly, you have thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, so I agree with a lot of the opinions around L2s generally, and to me that sort of carries into sharding in terms of the fracturing of what you're trying to do. You can certainly put APIs over the top and try and make it a more coherent experience. I also agree with you totally about sort of premature optimization. I think that there's lots of things that can be done for the theoretical problem of scaling to a billion, the theoretical problem of scaling to 1 billion users. Is that something that needs to be done right now? I think that's a question that's out there. When I think about those types of scaling solutions, I basically think, hey, they sound great. They solve a theoretical problem. They carry with them some very real practical problems at this stage. And so the question is it worth putting it in now? Typically, those types of technologies, they get absorbed because they are a good idea, but they get absorbed in a slightly different way than maybe you would have conceived at the moment, as long as you sort of wait to the last responsible moment to bring them in. So I don't know if that's a direct answer, but I think composability is the key piece. I think complexity is a key piece. I think all of those sort of I call them downsides in air quotes. Those issues are for me what drives is this the right time to put that in, or is that something that we can wait on?
Anatoly, anything to add on this topic before?
We haven't seen a cross-chain or cross-shard or cross-anything composability really be successful yet. And there's just so much room for improvement in a single state machine.
Yeah.
Like in terms of performance, you can add a lot. I think we're probably the furthest ahead, and I feel like, okay, I can see an easy 10x just of like putting in more software engineering hours, and that's not even trying to increase the hardware. So I don't know how those heterogeneous systems will compete with one that's already optimized and high performance and can scale.
So this leads to a natural question too, just at the ecosystem level. Do you think are there going to be network effects such that there's basically one big winner? Or do you think you end up in a world that you actually have multiple different approaches and multiple different chains that coexist for the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
I think it has to be multiple. It's really hard to be great at one thing, let alone all the things. And as everybody up here knows, like it's all about trade-offs all the time. What are you optimizing for? And if you're optimizing for everything, you will fail. And so I think there has to be multiple winners, and so interoperability becomes important, cross-chain bridging becomes important, and reducing the trust needed to get between those blockchains becomes even more important. Sometimes when I talk about it now, it's you trust the blockchain you're on, or you wouldn't be there. You trust the blockchain you're going to, or you wouldn't be going there. And in between, it's shark-infested waters, right? Like how do we make it so that it's safer to get from here to there? We released state proofs, this technology called state proofs that allows you to use a portable cryptographic proof to prove state in our chain and a smart contract. I know other folks have done similar things on the stage. And I think that's where, from an interoperability perspective, where it needs to go is that layer ones need to take more responsibility and making that easier and faster and cheaper for the users.
I've never seen large groups of people agree on anything. So I think that's definitely the case when there's financial incentives at play, especially like there is in the crypto space. So I think it's inevitable. I think the important part will be within an ecosystem, how it scales within itself and how it connects within itself. But I think it's really hard to get just groups of different ecosystems to really design well as a holistic unit. So I'm holding my breath there. I think there's a lot of third-party bridging solutions that are definitely tackling that. But I think, as probably Illia worries about and thinking about different things, is how do you actually make really easy cohesiveness within your actual ecosystem, especially if it's implicitly sharded or more explicitly sharded, like subnets or zones or parachains. And so I think, as Anatoly mentioned as well, like we'll see how that story plays out, and if like that sort of abstracted composability through different explicit units matches anything close to the feel of a single virtual machine that has strict composability within it. So I think that's really one of the big bets we'll see as people approach this scaling for 1 billion users.
So one of the other legs of the trilemma here is the decentralization part. So there's the scalability part and there's the decentralization. I'm curious, how do you all think about, like, what does decentralization mean in the context in which you operate? Maybe, I suspect everybody has a slightly different answer to this, so maybe we just go down the road. How do you think about decentralization?
So for me, decentralization is a tool. The goal is low switching cost. Like the reason why we want to be in Web3 versus Web2 is because we want to make sure that the things that ours belong to us, and if whatever provider, node, RPC, wallet, app, etc., is not behaving as you expected, you can switch. And so that requires decentralization on every single level, right? Like that's why we need a lot of nodes, so you can always, make sure that if node is not behaving correctly, there's other nodes that can pick up a slack. That's why you need to have lots of RPC providers, lots of wallets, lots of different apps providing kind of or like front ends providing the same protocols, different protocols providing variety, etc. And so for me, that's kind of the core of it. And so then, on every level, you can kind of determine what does that mean, including also like, is your team that developing this decentralized and is able to be like resilient to, various world events as well.
So in the context of the trilemma, though, with respect to scalability, is there some measure of decentralization that you think about? Like, how do you think about that scalability, decentralization trade?
Yeah, so for us, we think of it as kind of two sides, right? How many validators is kind of good enough at the latency, at the finality that we want to achieve. And then because we are sharding, which means like as more capacity is needed, we can add more validators kind of running different parts of the network. And so the idea is that you almost kind of pay per validator when you need it versus having lots of validators who then don't get any rewards and kind of running idle. Now there's then all the replicas that actually have like indexers, explorers, etc., who have the replica of data, who are validating, who are making sure the data correct and are able to recover. And so that kind of combination of things is how we think about it.
Patrick, how do you and Ava Labs think about
I think I think the theory has evolved a bit because I don't think a lot of systems have really been pushed on how decentralized they are. Like there hasn't been like some sort of agent that goes around and like shuts off huge portions of the network to see how it handles itself. I think my initial opinions on this matter were more so like how many validators participate in different consensus decisions, either like every consensus decision or like a single consensus decision spread through time. I think I think I've simplified that opinion to like how many physical machines can you turn off before the network stops in some sense. And so I think there is interesting points around different layers that Illia brought up. Like I don't think anyone really cares about RPC decentralization, and they definitely should if they knew what like a malicious RPC provider could do. And I just don't think many people care about it. So when we think about decentralization, there's like, as you know, our network has multiple tiers. So the primary network is all the validators on Avalanche, 13, 1400, however many it is, that are participating in every consensus decision through the subsampling process. But then subnets are a whole different thing, where as a subnet creator, you bring your own sense of decentralization, whatever that means to you. Now, if you're targeting higher throughput, different trade-offs on your virtual machine, that may mean very different things. Like maybe you're a gaming subnet, and all you care about is that the gaming company can recover if something goes wrong, versus maybe some sort of much more decentralized use case where you're trying to prevent massive faults because there's so much value at stake. And so for us, I think we have our opinion, but it's important to us that developers that build on us can also express their opinion as they need. And so we try to balance those two things. Yeah.
Anatoly?
I kind of try to boil it down to the simplest thing, which is the number of copies of the state, number of replicas. And it's a very dumb way of looking at it, but if you destroy every copy of the Bitcoin ledger, Bitcoin disappears. Nobody can prove who owns what, and it literally goes to zero. But at 12,000 copies, it's kind of pretty hard to do that. But maybe if Bitcoin was worth like $10 trillion, 12,000 copies wouldn't be that big of an ordeal, right? Or the prize might be big enough. So there's kind of a need for networks to decentralize further, to increase that to reduce the probability of a catastrophic failure as the value that it's securing goes up. But for that to occur, the technology needs to be suitable for that. It needs to actually be scalable and allow larger sets of validators to participate in it.
Yeah, so for me, I'd say decentralization is the most important thing about what we're doing here. And I think, again, trying to net it out, because it is so nuanced, it's all about control. The problem is there's so many control points. Being able to talk about something as the most important thing is really hard. You've got a token control point. You've got a consensus participation control point. You've got the state control point, full replicas of the state. You've got a device control point and geographic dispersion, cloud dispersion, et cetera. It just gets really hard to talk about, well, here's what it actually is. And that's a real problem, both for, in my opinion, us on stage, because we have to convince a lot of people, not everybody, but convince a lot of people that it is important, and it's hard to convince somebody if you don't have a very concise argument. And it's a problem for end users too, because it's so complex. They're just like, oh, it's probably fine. I'm on a blockchain, it's probably decentralized, right? And so it's not even a top-level thing for most users, particularly if you talk about scaling to 1 billion users. Those people are not going to be like, well, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Let's get a checklist together of decentralization points before I decide which app to use here. And so it's on us to figure it out. And it is complex, but it is the most important thing that we can figure out how to say concisely.
So it's a good observation, I think, and I don't think it's that contentious to say that maybe most users don't fully prioritize decentralization relative to some of the other benefits or features. I'm curious what you all think on the developer side, though. The developer community is much more sophisticated. In theory, should understand decentralization much more. Do you think developers actually care about the decentralization?
I think you get the same spectrum, right? Like it depends on what your some developers are completely market focused. Where can I go to build something that makes me the most money? Which is a totally rational thing to think and to chase, but maybe decentralization is not high on your checklist. And then you get people on the other side of the spectrum that are there, they're there for it, right? I'm going only where it is, and I don't care if I make any money, which again is a totally rational and reasonable thing to do, but it's a spectrum like everybody else.
But I think, as you mentioned, the current state is that there's no way to actually even compare these things,
Yeah.
right? Like, is Ethereum proof of stake right now more decentralized than name a chain? Like, it's unclear because, like, on one side it's control, like stake is controlled in this way, but the distribution of tokens is better. You know, the validators are run here, like more than 50% are US based. Like, is that a problem? Like, there's so many axes right now to compare that I think right now the market dynamics is actually more prevalent than people actually diving in and understanding. Like, for me, the most fun part is like a lot of developers go to investors and ask them what they should build on, right? Which is like the most probably ridiculous way of doing DD on
I don't know. I'm a big fan of that. I like that approach.
Or whatever foundation gives the biggest grants.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, like either they get a lot of money from someone, or they like, oh, which blockchain? They go to somebody who has vested interests, and like, you know, including toward our way as well. But like in general, they don't do DD on like on actual like parameters that they care about. They just kind of ask what makes sense, right? And so I think, you know, I only seen few teams that actually went and like did kind of a dive-in DD to understand like if they actually launch something and put a lot of traffic and, you know, actually exercise the blockchain, like what will happen, how this will behave.
So given this, I mean, this is a good observation. I think that's right. That matches what we see. Then how do you think about the developer experience? How do you think about attracting developers so that you can actually build applications that will then attract 1 billion users? Like, what's your approach? Because I think you all have taken slightly different approaches on this as well. Yeah, so what's your approach? Maybe Illia.
Yeah, I mean, so for us, we started from like, I mean, I'm a developer, right? And we actually wanted to build a blockchain application before we started this, and kind of realization was it's super complicated, cumbersome, you know, a lot of eating glass type thing. And so what we've been focused on from the beginning is like, how do we make it as simple as possible to kind of get it, to launch it, to iterate on it. And so a lot of decisions, including like, the contracts are upgradable by default, right? So you can actually continue to iterate and then put the, you know, DAO governance on top of it and kind of expand from there. So just a lot of the decisions, both protocol and developer tooling on that. And so through that is also supporting more languages. And so through WebAssembly, supported Rust from the beginning, we have Solidity, and we now just launched JavaScript, and people are doing Python and Move and like whatever else, right? You can actually launch any programming language, compile and run it in this environment. And if not compile it, then you can run an interpreter, and it's actually now really performant to do that. And so kind of our position was always like, just give developers all the Lego bricks and let them play with it, and kind of then make sure that they don't need to think about infrastructure underneath. Like, just don't.
You know, as we scale to more and more users, especially more and more developers, our approach has always been to maximize the flexibility of the entire virtual machine framework, we call it. And so there's one aspect of that, which is the execution framework. So, you know, what language can I use specifically? And then maybe there's constraints exactly around how that's compiled and then executed. Our virtual machine framework goes a little lower, and instead we expose a bunch of different plugin or let's just say functions that offer you networking, like actual control over the block itself, and everything that way. And then we dog food it because all of our virtual machines are then implemented on top of that same framework. And so our approach generally is, let's get out of the way for you to build whatever sort of virtual machine or chain you are trying to actually create for whatever use case it is, which we definitely don't know. So our platform more so is, let's create this highly performant networking and consensus engine, then you can tell us exactly how you want to execute it. Now, it's twofold because we also have the C chain, which most people interact with if they use Avalanche. That's just one of a handful of virtual machines we offer. And so for different developers and getting their experience, there's half of it, which is, hey, like you're on Ethereum or you're on some L2, like, are you interested in coming to Avalanche? And then the other aspect of it is the longer term R&D cycles of, hey, you're building a game from scratch. You want to have your game engine be on a blockchain, but you don't want to use Solidity or whatever other thing. Instead, you want to actually have your own chain with your own token, with your own validators that are maybe major players of the game, and providing the flexibility to do that. So in some sense, I think it's about where you introduce the customization into the framework for developers to actually build. And it's more, as we mature and the space matures, it's going to be more than just, here's this contract, run it however I want. It'll be, oh, I want to control the networking. Oh, I want to control gossip. Oh, I want to control how blocks are propagated through the network. So.
Anatoly, I know you have strong opinions on this.
Yeah, we probably don't focus. We're very focused on making the chain cheaper and faster. And that's basically, I would say, 99% of the engineering effort is spent on that. And developers have a very constrained sandbox because those requirements actually limit how much stuff you can do. But the devs that care about the cheap and fast part don't have any other options in the world, right? So this is kind of like the superpower that we can give them is that. And even, I would say, like, the languages are not, Rust is like a harder language typically than most devs are used to. And things like that, I think, are typically less important than having devs that have like a clear vision that want to accomplish something, and then the only way they can do it is to build it on Solana. Those are like basically the kind of devs that we work well with.
And so this also guides for example, no EVM compatibility.
Sorry, what?
This also guides your thinking on things like EVM compatibility.
Yeah, this was a lesson that we learned out of necessity. We just never had enough runway to build EVM compatibility. And when I launched, I realized that it's not important. It's trying to court Ethereum devs with like a bad version of the EVM is just not going to bring them over. Versus like, here's a new tool. You're an awesome dev. You're going to learn Rust in a weekend anyways. But here's something that you can't do on Ethereum to begin with. And that was like what activated the percentage of devs that really do like Solana.
Paul, you have anything you want to chime in on?
Yeah, my answer is totally different than all of these guys. No, I mean, we're focused on the same things, right? So first of all, they got to have the right. You got to have the right tools. You got to have the right environment. You got to be able to build the things you want to build. The underlying blockchain has to be able to provide the user experience that you want out of your application. I agree with Toly that I think the languages is like less important. I think it's easy to get caught up in well, you know, the EVM cabal. Is out there, and you got to be able to siphon it off. At the same time, good devs are good devs. They're going to learn Rust in a weekend. They're going to learn, you know, the other thing in a weekend. And as long as it can provide them what they need, they'll be into it. I guess the other part that we haven't talked a ton about is that it's not all about the underlying tech in terms of attracting the developers. And I think that's a big piece of it. And if we get too caught up in just the tech, like I think it misses the mark in terms of the overall developer ecosystem.
Yeah, and so are you thinking? Are you suggesting more that you think at the end of the day it's about the use cases for the end user more than it is the developer experience?
I can't. When I get it, you got it.
I know. Sorry. Is it? I'm curious what that. Take that forward maybe one step. Like, are you really saying it's not so much about the developer experience, or are you saying?
No, I'm saying developer experience is definitely important. If you bring in, it's like any funnel, right? If you bring people in the top of the funnel and then they reach a stage where they're like, well, this isn't any good, then they're going to take off. So the developer experience is critical, and we, like everybody else, put in a lot of effort there. I'm saying that when you're talking about the top of the funnel, only part of that is about the developer experience. It's also about who else is on there. What's the market depth look like? What's the brand that I'm going for here? What's the user experience of the underlying chain, for instance? And a number of other things that go into that decision-making framework when you're a developer that aren't just what's the developer experience like.
Yeah, so when you think about what those other things are, I mean, is there one that you think is the key? Like, do you think, for example, if you had one killer app, that actually gets the flywheel going, and so actually the critical thing is like finding one killer app, or is it like, how do you think about that then? Given how multifaceted it is it actually one thing, or is it all of them?
I don't think it's one thing. I think different people are looking at it different ways. They've got different decision-making factors. I think there's a lot of important pieces, the things that I listed being some of them. Yeah.
And so,
I mean, yeah, I think generally it is about ecosystem support. So like having a killer app or having a lot of users or having a lot of liquidity, it all feeds into that, and also having people on the ground who you can talk to, and funds that invest, and kind of, because like at the end there's a journey of any Web3 kind of entrepreneur, right? Not even developer, entrepreneur, and it starts with like, okay, I want to do a thing,
yeah.
and then they realize actually they have no idea how to do 90%. Like the problem with Web3 is that you're not building just your company, you're building also a public company right away, which needs to have like, proper marketing setup, investment, have like all of this like presence globally on day one while you're developing a product and trying to get users, right? And so that's why in Web3 a lot more frequently you see projects being incubated, because this experience of somebody who have launched is so much kind of leverage on versus in Web2, because they know how to launch token, how to set up legal, how to fundraise and find right backers, and how to go global and like have network across the world, right? Like all those things. And so for like the way we think about it is almost like the whole ecosystem is a gigantic incubator, right? That kind of, the more you have different pieces that can all work together to help projects launch, the more attractive the ecosystem becomes.
Yeah. One of the, I think, big missing pieces right now in a lot of these ecosystems is really the mobile aspect of it. Like if you look at just where traffic is, and who uses MetaMask, for example, and that's where all the dollars flow through, it's primarily desktop. And surely we can't reach 1 billion or 2 billion users without hitting mobile. So I'm curious, how are you all thinking about mobile?
So for us, we actually chose mobile web because both Apple and Google have a chokehold on applications. And so it's like right now, for example, since the market crash, Apple have been a lot more strict on what apps are released. A lot of wallets were not able to upgrade, et cetera. Yeah. And so near like original wallet was a web wallet, which actually worked in the web on mobile really easily. You can actually use all of the different apps on near connecting with that web wallet. I think going forward, supporting secure enclaves, supporting Face ID, all of those things are also part of it. And then in turn also adding things like Aurora Plus, like free transactions, really easy onboarding that kind of integrates directly into this. And it's all possible without changing the operating system.
I think we think about it in sort of two ways. One is the users, and two is the devices. The users we think about as a lot of the same as non-mobile users. They're looking for value-added apps. They don't really care about the underlying blockchain necessarily. They're looking for the best possible thing that brings them the value they're looking for. And so in terms of what we're trying to do to support, it's all the same sort of developer tool. Like you got to make sure they have the apps there that they like. So it's the same sort of developer tools. Instead of the JavaScript SDK, it's a Unity SDK. It's a C#. It's like the tools to allow those things to be developed on the mobile side. On the device side, I think it's super interesting. You've got the largest sort of segment of devices that is used the most. It's used for business. It's used for personal. They're on all the time. It's an area that if you could get that network involved in consensus, for example, I think that's super interesting. Yeah. Whether that's through mesh network to deal with the bandwidth, or through things like state proofs, which allow validation of state in low resource environments. That I think is super interesting. I wouldn't say we're chasing that down at this point, but I definitely think it's interesting.
Anatoly, I know you have thoughts on mobile.
I was going to wait. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we probably have the most aggressive attempt at a mobile strategy, and it really comes from the Web2 App Store business models just don't really work with Web3. Like you saw Apple's announcement, they want to charge 30% fees on NFT sales. Magic Eden can't take like a user-owned NFT that's a truly owned digital item that's worth $10,000 and offer it for $13,000 on their mobile app. It's just not going to work when the user can go buy it for 10K on the desktop app. And Magic Eden can't eat that cost because unlike when you buy a movie at Amazon, Magic Eden doesn't own this content. The user that posted that content really actually owns it. So there's no way to just kind of like pay that Apple tax. And the only way that changes is if you actually, drive a wedge between like the Web 2 App Store models by Google and Apple and what Web 3 does. I think mobile WebView and like a bunch of other technologies are all pushing at that. But our approach is probably the most aggressive. I think there's an opportunity to make the experience of using blockchain and signing just delightful and awesome and super integrated into the device. You saw with like the Slope wallet hack, wallets are just like really, really hard to build and make secure. If you accidentally logged your seed phrase to a remote server because you're just some junior dev logging all the environment variables out, that's like a very simple bug to introduce. And wallets are becoming, multimedia like serving like things. The content that they're serving is going to get more and more complicated. The applications of those like XNFTs are basically applets with full-on applications. Like those experiences are going to get more sophisticated, and you got to still keep those environments really safe. So both of those things kind of coming together, and because my team and myself, we spent over a decade at Qualcomm, we kind of saw it as an opportunity. Well, what if we built a device that we think should have been done like 5 years ago? and like that's just awesome and optimized, treats crypto as a first-class citizen and see what happens. This has been like the number one thing that a lot of devs that I talk to in our hackathons, whenever I ask them about mobile strategy, they're like, well, we don't know when we're going to get shut down. And that's basically like an existential risk to any startup that's raised funding is now grinding for product market fit. Imagine like at any point, like Apple just kills your business. That really sucks. So this is an opportunity, I think, to really decentralize like Web3 and mobile and make it user-owned and crypto-friendly.
The pain is really real for us right now. We're pushing our core mobile app through the app stores right now. And all we're trying to do is just provide a subnet optimized experience for different people that has bridging and stuff enabled with it. And it's back and forth about every little thing. So we're really excited to see like open ecosystem participation in like just anyone building phones like this, even if they're specific for an ecosystem, because I think it will push some of the other players to think about what they're doing. They may not change it, but at least if there's success in the space, that there may be more providers and more folks that open up more so to crypto in general.
I think it says something when we openly talk about saying we're going to take down the banks and the global financial system, but as soon as we think about competing with Google and Apple, everyone's like, oh no.
Yeah. Well, hopefully there's some regulators listening to this right now. Hopefully if you're in the audience, come talk to any Web3 dev about how painful the mobile development and ship process is. All right, guys, we only have a couple minutes left. Maybe to end on a fun and nice note, does everybody want to say one nice thing about one of the other L1s on here? You can have your pick. You can say one nice thing about whoever you want to say.
Yeah, I'll start. So Nir, I like the way you guys have really stayed technology forward and made that sort of the centerpiece. We often, when we're looking around for implementations and things in the market, when we see your stuff, we often come away and say, "Oh, that's pretty good." So, there you go. Which we don't say it. Of course, not talking about you guys, but we don't say about other people. Like we don't always say that, but we tend to say that for your stuff. So, there you go.
You don't have to reciprocate. Just one nice thing about it.
Yeah.
We're in a bear market, guys. There's a lot of depression. A lot of people are sad right now. I thought we'd try to uplift and share some love.
I think we are legitimately in a world where the competition isn't zero sum yet. So I'm pretty happy to be on stage with all these folks. State proofs on Algorand are pretty cool, and I think we're trying to build the same thing and make that commercialized. So definitely a good idea.
Cool.
I think Solana really opened the door to the performance above all else conversation with blockchain that really people hadn't come to yet. And I think as soon as they saw success, really started seeing success a year ago, I think it changed a huge part of the narrative around what blockchains could do and how they could optimize for different trade-offs. And I think that has made the space much more interesting, I think, than it was prior to that growth. Yeah.
Yeah, I would second on Solana pretty much kind of driving forward, bringing Rust developers, which is probably the most kind of needed for Web3 in general. Like I think at this point, 90% of all the blockchain, actual core development is happening in Rust. And so actually having more developers coming in and even if they're coming through application side, but then they learning the tricks and then then spreading around the ecosystem as a whole has been a very, very beneficial.
All right, guys. Well, thank you all for the time. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for having us.
Thank you.